We're going to be talking about confronting anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias as chaplains, as spiritual care providers. And this program has been planned in partnership with Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains. So we're so glad to be partnering with you all and the task force, all the organizations that make up the task force. We're so glad to be able to present this lunch and learn with you, and we hope that it's something that you can take back to your own organizations. During the panel discussion, we ask that everyone keep their microphones on mute. We will have time for question and answers. You will see one of my colleagues, her name is Send Questions Here. You will actually send your questions directly to her, and she will put the questions on my document so I can see how many questions we have, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But this will definitely be an ongoing conversation. So if we don't get to your question, maybe some other time we can pick it up, but we are grateful to just have this conversation today. So today we have the opportunity to enter into conversation with members of the task force that was created from various chaplaincy organizations who have come together to address the growing anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias we have witnessed after the October 7th attack in Israel. And the strategic partners of this task force actually include 6 organizations: the Association of Jewish Chaplains, the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, the Association of Professional Chaplains, the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, the Association for Spiritual Care, and the Association of Muslim Chaplains. And so we have representatives from these organizations that are going to come and share with you about this task force, how it has come together, what they are planning on doing as far as equipping other chaplains to address anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias. And so I have the pleasure to introduce our panelists. I'm super excited to just be in conversation with them all. So I'll start with Alyssa Thomas Newborn. She is the incoming president of the Association of Jewish Chaplains, Neshama, the Association of Jewish Chaplains. She is a board-certified chaplain at New York Presbyterian Columbia University, Irving Medical Center, and she specializes in palliative care, critical care, and emergency psychiatric care. So, Alyssa, welcome. Najiba Akbar is representing the Association of Muslim Chaplains on the task force. She is a chaplain and life coach who has been serving the greater Boston Muslim community in various capacities for the past 20 years. She formerly served as a youth director at the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center and as the Muslim chaplain at Wesley College. So Najiba, welcome. So glad you're here with us. And we have Erica Cohen-Moore. She is the executive director of the National Association of Catholic Chaplains based out of Milwaukee. For the past 20 plus years, Erica has served in various leadership roles working with diverse groups, including chaplains. Erica, we are so glad you're here with us. And then we have Naomi Kalish, representing the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. She is the Harold and Carol Wolf Director of the Center for Pastoral Education and Assistant Professor of Pastoral Education at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And prior to coming to the seminary, she taught clinical pastoral education at New York Presbyterian Hospital to students from diverse religious, denominational, and national and cultural backgrounds. And so we are so glad to have you here with us, Naomi, as well. So let's get started. I'm actually going to have Alyssa share with us how this task force has come together. If you could just give us an overview of what brought you all together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having our task force and for this amazing learning program. It's our honor to be here. The task force came together immediately following October 7th. Our strategic partners, which again includes APC, NAJC, ACPE, CASC, NACC, and AMC, came together to explore and discuss how we can best support our colleagues, how we can best support each other, because there's tremendous grief and loss and terror, and the feeling among colleagues of going from working together in partnership across across faith lines and across any sort of boundaries or walls previously, suddenly having a lack of discussion or having a sense of silence or silo or fear. We also know that before October 7th, there was also a partnership happening between all of our organizations. We're very lucky that we have a positive connection between each other. And so we had already been working to, especially between NAJC and AMC, the Jewish and Muslim partners, to address the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias that existed before October 7th, and that was something that needed to be tackled and addressed in our fields. So that there was already a foundation for us to come together, but we felt more than ever that it was essential for us to have some sort of space, specifically with a few tasks that came into mind. So I'm just going to share what those goals are. The task force is tasked to share how to support our Jewish and Muslim colleagues, to provide a safe space for members of faith communities to name their hurt, fear, and helplessness, to offer resources, including webinars, a website, and a digital toolkit that outline the modes of communication in an interfaith space, to provide training and resources in trauma-informed care, to offer a writing or video gallery for communities to tell their stories of hope, and to build cross-community solidarity and collective action to counter hate. And we recognize that hate comes in all forms. And as chaplains, we are uniquely situated to step into spaces where there is hate and division and pain, liminality, and to have really tough conversations. So we felt that, more than ever, chaplains' voices were needed in this space. Between October 7th and December 7th, the ADL reported 2,031 anti-Semitic attacks, up from 465 incidents in the same period in 2022, representing a 337% increase year over year. And the Council on American Islamic Relations reports a 216% increase in requests for help regarding anti-Muslim incidents from 2022 to 2023. And that has continued. So we know that, these are even out of date statistics that I just shared. But the truth is that as colleagues in spiritual care, as people invested in the human spirit, we knew that coming together was necessary. And so the question was how we were going to do that in a way that was productive within our fields and personally in our relationships.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, for just giving us a general overview of why this task force has come together. And you're right, as chaplains, we do stand in those places where we can address hate. We can create those spaces to have these conversations. So I'm just so glad that you all, even before October 7th, had these relationships to be able to say, let's come together during this particular time. So not everybody is aware of all the organizations that you represent. I would love to hear from each of you. Just share about your organization and why they particularly said we have to get involved during this time.
I can start. I'm Erica Cohen-Moore with the National Association of Catholic Chaplains. I also want to highlight two of my colleagues are on this call that aren't on the larger screen. Allison Atterbury is the interim ED for NAJC. She's with us. And then Pat Applehans is the CEO for APC. I see them up above. So it's great to have you with us. So NACC really felt it a priority to get involved because one of our 4 major initiatives with our strategic planning process is diversity and welcoming diversity. And so this is just such a key part of it. And so in the past couple of years, we've been offering webinars with the help of our colleagues on interreligious dialogue, et cetera, learning more about other faiths. How do we serve chaplains? How do we serve everyone better? Because we can always do more and know more. I also want to just highlight that we do have strong partnerships, and it's only we're only as strong as our partners. And so we have to do this work together. And so I really appreciate that we do get together as the strategic partners and we talk about this issue, whether it be this particular topic or if it's anti-bias, racism, all the topics. It's what can we do together? What can we do more? So always open to dialogue from all of you. And it's exciting to see 160 plus participants today and to eventually have the opportunity to hear all your voices. And the other thing I just want to note is coincidentally, it's World Interfaith Harmony Week, which I just think is lovely that this is happening during this week. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica. And we actually did not plan that. It just happened to be there. So that's great. Thank you.
It's Joe Elson, Pioneer Village Police Department. I basically got into the class here because I'm like Erica. I needed to know more about the different religions and how to best get along with and communicate with them, especially since we have such a big movement of the different faiths, in the United States, and especially here in Pioneer Village, Kentucky. So I look forward to all the response from everybody else too. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Najiba. I am representing the Association of Muslim Chaplains, AMC. And a little bit about our organization. We're a professional association and we serve chaplains in a variety of contexts. So education, healthcare, military, as well as community chaplains. So we have quite a diverse membership. And as such, the needs of our members are very diverse. And we have been talking a lot about how to support one another, particularly in the last 4 months, as many of us are facing, incredibly challenging circumstances, both with the populations we work with, as well as the institutions that we're situated in. And we really wanted to be part of that conversation, across religious spaces. How can we support each other as chaplains? How can we see each other and recognize, some of the parallel struggles that we're facing, and really, first come to a space of empathy and understanding, and then also, strategic partnering. How can we help each other as we try to help ourselves, so that we can best help those that we serve. So thanks for having us with you today.
Thank you so much, Najiba.
And I'll introduce myself next. I'm Naomi Kalish. I'm representing ACPE in this call. And I think probably like many of us, we have different hats that we can wear at different times. And so in this context, representing ACPE, I'm really focused on the mission of ACPE and the function in terms of conducting and implementing CPE training and education. And so what I'd say is, how did it come about that we are participating in this initiative? Part of it is because our members who are CPE educators, or who are educators of certified education candidates, are themselves feeling very distressed, both Muslim and Jewish, people who have direct personal connection to the conflict, and have experienced what I think of as like the ripple effects of the trauma, as well as this second dynamic of, as Alyssa mentioned, the rise in hate crimes towards Muslims and towards Jews in the United States. So the first reason is because our own membership is feeling distressed. And then a second reason would be because in our work, our mandate and our purpose is to be educators around diversity and inclusion, and how we bring in caring for the spirit of people and the emotions of people, how we bring in humanizing. And so I'd say there are questions that have come up in our classrooms, and then by extension, I'm sure that the people representing the chaplaincy direct care are feeling this, also in terms of how the current day challenges are coming up in the clinical context as well. So those are the two primary reasons that bring ACPE here.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And you actually raised what my next question is going to be is, oftentimes, of course, we as chaplains are taking care of other people. We're providing the spiritual care support. But as you mentioned, a lot of chaplains, both Muslim and Jewish, have been impacted and have felt that ripple effect. And so I would love, even if it's just several of you, to just talk about how have chaplains within your organizations been impacted by anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias, and how have, before the task force, because I know you all have specific strategies you're going to use to help chaplains, deal with this difficult time, but how have chaplains actually addressed anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias in their day-to-day work? What are the stories that you all have heard?
It's a great question. I think that and it includes NAJC's desire to be involved in this and having those initial conversations. This is very personal. This is our hearts and our homes and our identities. We all come to this work serving in an interfaith context, multi-faith context, just meeting each other's souls. And at the same time, we are coming from communities that when they're feeling tremendous pain, it can't help but impact us. So I think, in terms of our wider field, we're hearing from chaplains and from all staff, a sense of, I mentioned, silence or isolation, wondering if, there's a trust that was lost between certain colleagues, grief and how that impacts day-to-day work. And, I think that there's been really wonderful efforts that people have made. And certainly I can say, from the NAJC side, but I know it's true in the other organizations too, to bring chaplains together and be able to have the safe space to express hurt and feel connection and mourn with each other. And also to be able to advocate for the needs of all of our patients and staff who are coming from a variety of faiths. So anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bias, racism in any other form as well, they exist, they're real, they're on the ground and in some of our, in our workplaces and in our interactions and relationships, and being able to respond to them in the moment or do preemptive education. So that's a big one, I think, is teaching about what actually is, what does it look like for something to be anti-Semitic. I know I was teaching in a community a couple years back with a pastor, and the community said, that they had never learned the word anti-Semitism. They didn't even know what that meant, and that it was eye-opening to think, to sort of understand some of the hatred that is systemic, and including certainly from both, I think, the Jewish and Muslim world. We have a lot in common. And before October 7th, had a lot of really positive dialogue about how to address hate.
Thank you, Alyssa. Anybody else want to share on that question?
Yeah, I can speak to my experience. So I'm coming from, I think, a different context than many of those on the call today. So I work on a campus community. So I'm the Muslim chaplain at Tufts University. I was also recently serving at Northeastern. And, what we witnessed was really just a young population seeing for the first time the horrors of war and violence, and that being constantly live streamed on their phones, on Instagram. And I think this is the first time in history that I think I've seen young people have access to those kinds of images that they're looking at every morning and every night before they go to sleep. And this is what they've spoken to us about. So the state of trauma that my students have been in for the last 4 months, I can't describe, how that's impacted me as their chaplain, just kind of holding them in that space while I myself am in that space. So as chaplains, that's really the crux of what our work is holding that space for others. But this situation was so challenging because we ourselves were feeling all the effects of the trauma of watching the violence unfold in Israel and in Gaza. And so, a lot of what we're seeing is students having to grapple with that. How are they following, the events happening overseas while still having to show up to class every day and, act like the world is the same as it was yesterday when, everything's not the same. And particularly our students who are from the region. We have students whose families were in Gaza, who are literally running for their lives. And meanwhile, they're, quote unquote, safe here in the US, but then also seeing, examples of not just anti-Muslim sentiment, but we, recently saw 3 Palestinian students who were attacked in Vermont, who were shot. And so just, the reverberations of that on students, of seeing, how they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe on campus. They don't feel safe in the world because of, how they're identified by others. And also this idea of, people ascribing certain characteristics or beliefs to Muslims, to Arabs, to Palestinians. We've heard students, say that a Muslim student said, somebody came and asked him point blank over lunch, why do Muslims hate Jews? And he's a Palestinian American student and never thought that someone would think that, nor that he would have to answer that question in front of a group of friends. And so these are just some of the stories that really kind of show just the real state of, I think, like trauma, fear, mistrust, anger that has been very, very acute on college campuses. And it, obviously affects us who are trying to care for these communities and try to just hold them in that space of grief. There was really it was very hard to move forward with any type of intergroup kind of conversations last semester, because I think we were just really focused on holding the pain and the grief of our students and doing what we needed to make them feel supported. I think now, as we're moving into the spring, we're thinking more about, how do we engage with each other? How do we hear each other's stories? And how do we kind of open that doorway for communication and dialogue? So that's where we're at now in my work. And, I do have other fellow chaplains on the call as well, who maybe later on can speak to experiences in other institutions, like, the healthcare and military chaplains that we also serve. But right now I'm speaking to my experience as a college chaplain.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I've heard several times you all talk about just the grief and the pain that you are witnessing, and just creating space for people just to lament, to share, to ask those questions. And so I'm seeing you keep on raising that grief part. And I think being attentive to that is so important. Naomi and Erica, I would love to hear from you all about what have you seen as the impact, and how has your particular organizations or chaplains within your organizations been addressing?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. One is to take a step back and describe a little bit about what ACPE has had in general, as well as I think this also speaks to our chaplaincy field more broadly, which is that there are organization-wide approaches, and then there's also small, what we could call like pockets, or sometimes like in ACP we used to call them networks, now we call them communities of practice. But I think our field really moves back and forth between the sense of shared humanity and then also what's distinctive. And so like in ACPE, there's been for decades now, the REM network, with the racial, ethnic, multicultural, that would support people who were from racial minorities and ethnic minorities, just as people experiencing challenges in the larger ACPE process. And so similarly, like I think all of our faith-specific groups, NHAC, NACC, Muslim Chaplaincy Association, like are all creating those kinds of spaces so that people can go in and out, because I think there are distinctive features we've all experienced. So ACPE does have a Jewish community of practice. And so that's been kind of like a safe space to be able to talk about some of the experiences, I think, like pre-October 7, as well as since October 7. I really resonate with what's been said so far. I think with this tension between the kind of broader field, I think what brings so many people to chaplaincy is a delight, in a sense of purpose and being in the interfaith space. And so the real breakdown of that has been a loss on top of the other losses. It's not a completely broken, and that's why this meeting feels so powerful and meaningful to come together. But I'd say it's fragile. I agree with Najeeba, what you were saying about like sometimes groups and people need to kind of focus on what's most immediate. And so I think sometimes like I'd say in ACPE that's happened both among the Jewish as well as Muslim communities. But I think a piece that's been really hard that has been helpful for me to think about is the pressures in the polarization that has happened since October 7th. That there's a lot of different diversity in lots of different ways within all of our overlapping communities, but there's been so much pressure to separate, which again, sometimes I think when it comes to the issues we're talking about, like very basic safety issues and issues of the violent deaths of people we're connected to, or the uncertainty of their safety, like the hostages, or the intergenerational trauma that is affecting, I think, a lot of people from a lot of perspectives. So it makes sense to care for one's own in some ways, but then also that's been accompanied by this rise in hate. And I think that's what's so disturbing, is they don't need to go together, but in these last 4 months, they have gone together. So, so I'd say those are some of the ways through these kind of smaller points of connection, pockets of connection, people have been supporting one another.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Before you go, Erica, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box to send questions here, because we definitely want to make sure we have time to get to your questions. All right, Erica, you can go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I should say, in my role, I am more of in the office dealing with concepts, ideas, concerns from all of our members. So I don't get the opportunity to be on the ground per se. So I might speak with a different voice. I would say the hope is what we're seeing, and what we hope to do is to be a safe place for people to come to ask questions, to enter into the conversation. Everybody's going to enter this conversation in a different place. Everybody has a different understanding. Some have a very beginning level understanding. Najiba, you mentioned that about one of your students being concerned about what they said and how they said it, and maybe a lack of knowing. And then there's people that have been involved in this dialogue and conversation for years. And so how do we help people who are entering into dialogue and conversation on this very difficult topic in a safe way, so they can ask questions? And we all work through our work, like our anti-bias, together and grow from it. And so this task force, we really want to offer safe space for everybody to grow their understanding and have a safe place for dialogue.
Thank you so much, Erica. And that is so important, that we do create those safe spaces, or brave spaces, as they're often called, to have hard and difficult conversations. So thank you for that. So we're having some wonderful questions come in, and I want to make sure we have time to answer them. But before we get to the questions from this community, I would love for you all to share. I know this is a newly formed task force. I know you've already had connections before you formed the task force, but I would love to hear from each of you. What have you learned so far as a result of participating in this task force that would help other chaplains and even other organizations who are trying to navigate this difficult time? And Alyssa had already shared about some of the strategies that you all will be wanting to, put into place. But I would love to just hear from you all. What are you learning in this process that maybe has surprised you, or you said, if you're thinking about creating some type of community of different organizations, this is something to keep in mind. So I would love to hear from each of you on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. Two things are coming up for me. One is that, in initially having conversations and gathering together and just sitting at the table, that felt like such a sacred act, because people were, especially at the beginning, afraid to talk to each other. And I think Najiba was getting at that, like, now maybe it feels a little bit different, but certainly toward the beginning, it really was significant, and continues to be. And I remember thinking, everyone, even if you're not Jewish or Muslim or Arab, Palestinian, you're also processing, witnessing the trauma, and how do you respond, and do you reach out to certain people, and what do you say, and if you don't say anything, what is that? And having those kinds of conversations with our colleagues across faiths was really a helpful thing to learn from, especially I think in terms of the bubble that I am in and that I inhabit. I think that the other thing that really comes up for me and that I do want to share on behalf of our wider task force, because the task force is composed of 13 people, not just the four of us. The four of us are happy to be here though, is that we realized that in order to really provide resources for our membership organizations, that we needed to do the work internally in our task force first, and have, conversations that are professionally facilitated to give us the chance to connect around and in response to combating hatred, as opposed to having a discussion about the news and the war. And that in and of itself, I think, was a very clear different model. And then within that, figuring out how we can authentically share with our membership organizations, which is something that's actively happening. Like, this isn't we did this 6 months ago, it's done. Now we're presenting on what we're doing. We're literally doing it right now. And how important it is, I think, to be authentic in our leadership in our organization, so that whatever we are going to convey as helpful tools are tools that have been tested by the people making them and truly reflect each of our voices in a way that is honest.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Yeah, I'll add something that I reached out to a mentor when I was going into doing some interfaith work in this arena last fall, and said to him, I'm not Palestinian, I'm Muslim, but I want to support the students that I know and also hold a broader space of support for students. And I was doing this at the Tufts Medical School. And I said, sometimes I don't feel like, maybe I'm not the right person to be doing this right now because of my identity, or maybe my lack of connection to this particular, this particular moment. Not, I was thinking all these things and trying to make sense of it. And he said, you might be the perfect person right now to be in the room because you're holding the trauma for others who are at the center of it, at the core of it. And they need someone in the room who can stay grounded as they process. And that was really helpful for me to hear. And so that's my message to all of you as well. Don't think that just because you're not Palestinian or Arab or Jewish that you don't have a role to play in the caretaking that needs to happen. That particular event that I did was probably the most productive and beautiful event that happened. And it was myself and two other chaplains. And we went not representing our traditions, but just representing ourselves as chaplains. And we held space for the emotional pain of, Israeli and Palestinian and Christian and Buddhist and non-religious students to just be in a room together in a space that felt safe for them to just talk about what was on their hearts. And, we didn't talk in a big group. We gave them space to meditate on how they were feeling and join in smaller groups. But that experience taught me a lot about the power of our work and how we can show up as, shepherds for other people's healing, including our own. It was a healing experience for me as well. So that, in addition to the work we're doing with our own chaplains, I wanted to spread that message to all of you that we all can have a role to play, because this is not a Jewish issue or an Arab issue. This is a human issue of people suffering, of people dying, of various ideologies being used to oppress or silence or use violence. And this is something that should concern all of us. And it shouldn't be something that's siloed into like a religious conflict or an ethnic conflict. It really is something that strikes at the core of all of our humanities. And so we're trying to do the work as organizations I represent, Muslim and Jewish and other chaplains, but I think each of us can do the work in our own way as we're serving those who are impacted by this.
Thank you so much, Najiba. Thank you.
I think as we know as chaplains, it's always so meaningful to have a direct relationship and to directly hear and bear witness to the pain that people are going through. And so with the stress on interfaith relations at this point, it's been so meaningful to be part of this task force, to have direct relationships. Like, even if there's some things that I could imagine or I've read in the news or, but to have direct relationships. with that, on a personal note, I've had a lot of people asking me, a lot of people in the Jewish community asking me about my interfaith relationships, because they know I do a lot of like kind of in chaplaincy and also beyond chaplaincy, and saying, how's that going? And it's been hard. And actually one person kept saying to me, like, do you have hope? Like, and so as I started saying, well, I'm having this conversation with this person and they said, so it sounds like you have hope. And I realized there was a need for people to feel like that there was some hope. There's some kind of proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, like that we are moving towards like healing and rebuilding, even like with all of this pain. So that's been just really important, I think, in terms of just like the fact that people know that this task force exists. And I think the final thing I'll say also is there are a lot of ways, as we know, to respond to the current situations, and especially a lot of activism. And activism has a powerful place. Um, I really feel very called to a pastoral care, spiritual care approach to healing that on a very basic level, if we don't see the humanity in one another, like there's no enduring peace. And so it's for me just very meaningful to be able to be in a place where I'm with people, like with my people, so to speak, of the people who are really caring about the emotional pain and trauma and wanting to focus on how we heal from that first. Like, and I wouldn't say instead of, but in addition to whatever activism people feel called to engage in at this time.
Thank you, Naomi. All right, Erica.
Yeah, I would say one of the hopeful things I find that have come out of the task force, and admittedly, we've only had the opportunity to meet 3 times, and I already feel very profoundly connected to the group. And I think it's because we're finding a sense of commonality. So although we bring different religion, we bring different tradition, we bring stories where there's links of commonality with each other. I think at our last meeting, somebody brought up how they learned how to ride a bicycle, and it brought us into this incredible storytelling, how everybody had some seems small, but it links us together. It's what it creates relationship. And it's as Naomi mentioned, it's just a privilege to bear witness together as we go on this journey together, and so grateful for it. And so more to come, but the hope is that everybody participating in this event today, and then from all of our organizations, that they know that they can come to this task force with a question. And we've already received questions from members, and we can sit and maybe live in the tension of those questions and work with them as 13 people from 6 different organizations, and to say, well, this is what we came up with. What do you think? And then continue that dialogue, because we're not going to have the perfect answers and it's going to take time, but it's a start.
Yes, thank you, Erica. And I appreciate you talk about sitting in that tension. One thing Alyssa also brought up is there's some inner work that you all are doing as a task force. And I think that's so important. And it just speaks to the level of intentionality that you are bringing to this, that you are recognizing, hey, we have to do some work in this task force before we offer, our suggestions. And like you said, Erica, even listening and saying, does that work for you? Like, this is not the answers for everybody, but this is what we came up with as we have worked together. So I just so appreciate you all. We have some wonderful questions from our community that has gathered here. And so I would love to get to some of them. And please forgive me in advance if I don't get to your question. Hopefully on another Lunch and Learn, we can address some of these questions. But I would love and not everybody has to speak to this, but if you feel so called, somebody asked, they said at their current organization, silence is the expectation, both implicitly and explicitly. How have the panelists found ways to navigate when we are almost or are required to be silent?
Well, this sounds subversive, but I'd say find spaces where you don't need to be silent. I guess there's different types of giving voice. Like sometimes it's there's a goal of communication with like leadership in an organization, but if it's from like a emotional coping perspective, one can create their own subgroups. I mean, I think it's actually the beauty of chaplaincy and of any kind of confidential caregiving is that there is a space. So that's my thought, is like call your own coffee meeting, or again, it depends on exactly what type of giving voice people are looking for.
I would also express, curiosity around that silence too. We know that curiosity is a tool we have as chaplains, even like non-judgmentally, where that's coming from. I might assume that it's coming from a place of fear, or someone could say something that offends someone else, or, create some serious HR issues. And I wonder, where that's coming from. I think we also know that silence is always saying something in some form. And sometimes it means someone's taking a second to reflect and try to figure out what to say. And sometimes it means something totally different, and it could hold our worst fears and be real, or it could not. So I would just be curious, why that is. And I don't know if you have a safe address to ask the question, where it can be received in the way that you want it to be.
I think in the silence, oops, sorry.
Sorry, I'll just echo how difficult it has been when you feel silenced to just show up and know that you have to leave part of yourself at the door because you can't talk about something that's so important. It can be very soul crushing. So I think similar to Naomi, I've tried to figure out ways where I can use my voice, because sometimes we're asked not to use our voice in a particular way if we're institutionally affiliated. And that can also be difficult to navigate. I think we've all been navigating difficulties within institutions as well. And so I've had to think about, okay, where can I use my voice strategically? Who do I want to talk to use that voice? And also, how do I protect myself, as I'm using my voice, seeing what's happening online and social media and the doxing that's happening, and teaching my students that too. How do you use your voice strategically in a way that's going to have an impact? Do you have a greater impact with a Facebook post, or do you have a greater impact talking to someone one-to-one? How do we use our voice and not getting pigeonholed into, certain ways of using our voice that can be difficult or problematic, or have negative effects on us. I mean, we've seen people lose their jobs, over this. So it's definitely really challenging. And I think it just requires some, maybe some curiosity and strategy, as we've said on the panel.
And an opportunity to be sure that you're connecting with somebody so you can continue the conversation, so you're not feeling silenced. And so you have 164 people on this call. Who in your organization can you connect with and talk to and process? I think that's really key and important if you're feeling silenced within your own work organization.
So just going off of that question about being silent or feeling like you have to be silent. And I think it was Alyssa who talked about, sometimes you don't know what to say, or you fear saying the wrong thing, so you just don't say anything. And so one of the questions that came up are, how are chaplains being careful on the language that they use to talk about this situation? Because you don't want to say the wrong thing, but sometimes you don't want to be silent. So are there ways in which chaplains are, just being extra careful during this time, how the language that they're using? Go ahead, Naomi. Or
Naomi,
Alyssa.
Naomi, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think we have a real opportunity, both as chaplains as well as a contribution beyond chaplaincy, to really focus on the human experience, like the individual's experience. Like a gesture of care is not, I mean, it's political in the sense that it's making a statement that all people matter. and that one's emotional, spiritual experience matters. But beyond that, it's not like a policy statement. So we have tools that I think we are using and we could use more in our field, but also I think can be a contribution beyond, which is just like talking to people human to human. How are you doing? Saying, I care about you. And I know this is a really difficult time. That kind of language, but that kind of language isn't always valued by everybody. So I think we have a real opportunity to share that. I think language is really complex because something I've learned about also that I've just become more sensitive to is also how some of the language that's being used in all directions sometimes has one intention and a different kind of impact, or that certain expressions can mean different things to different people. And so I think we also, as we engage in more discussion, like really have a lot that we can learn from one another to have productive exchanges and productive conversations of what one another is going through. So I'll just leave it there. But I think language is a really huge issue that we can our intentionality with it can be a real contribution.
I would add that I think part of our role as chaplains is to witness others' suffering and to not necessarily insert ourselves at the center, but really listening to the language that the person we're with is using. And, again, as Naomi said, realizing that that language means something to them. It might mean something different to us. And so taking the lead of those we're serving. I know this is hard if you're making a speech to a large group or addressing, a big group. But as much as we're able to really be there and hear like behind what the person is saying, using there's a language that I learned called like your giraffe ears, your friendly ears, to kind of listen for the meaning behind what someone is saying. But yeah, I do recognize it's the language piece has been really difficult. Again, just that example of, a Muslim student, wanting to share a critique about what's happening and being labeled as anti-Semitic, and what does that language mean, and how do they take in that language versus how did the other person hear what they had to say. So these are the conversations that are really difficult to have, especially when we're hearing and processing things very differently. So I think just acknowledging that and being able to show up for the person and hear what their experience is and respond to that, and maybe putting aside the judgment that we might have about the language being used can be really important.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add, I work specifically in healthcare. I'm in a hospital in New York. And, I think that there's been a couple instances that really stood out to me that were so meaningful for our staff and nourishing for our chaplains. I'm really grateful that I work with a wonderful Muslim chaplain, Chaplain Sarah Amine Unal. She's really fantastic. I know a lot of you know her. She and I actually last year presented at a conference together on our dynamic and how we support each other in caring for Jewish and Muslim patients and advocate for each other. So it's another sort of example of having that built-in relationship, which is really great. But in terms of the things happening in the units, one of my units asked me to come and pray for the whole unit with the staff. And so that prayer, I am a Jewish person, but the prayer, and we know as chaplains, we do extemporaneous multi-faith prayer all the time. That prayer, I was very specific with my language and how I did that. I also, have led a couple discussions with staff where it wasn't specifically about, the details of Israel and Gaza, but rather conversations about the triggering feeling of, especially for healthcare workers, that the news is bombarding them with traumatic, triggering images again. And it feels like COVID, where can you trust the people who are, above you, and how just creating a safe space for staff to reflect on the ways they actually connect, as opposed to creating spaces of disconnection. So I do think, having that has meant a lot. And within our hospital setting, knowing that there's Muslim and Jewish chaplains who are working together. I've heard from all kinds of staff say like, oh, just knowing you guys are working together makes me feel better. Mm-hmm. And I also, in addition to working in a hospital, I have a Jewish congregation in Teaneck, New Jersey. And in Teaneck, the community has certainly, it's been through a lot, and it's felt at times very siloed. And I think that, my congregants have commented to me, because I shared, that there's this task force and they know the work I'm doing. And they've said, it's just like so comforting to know that people are coming together. So even if someone isn't at the table, knowing that others are at the table in the midst of the pain and the grief and the suffering, I think makes a really big difference. So the language is a great point, because we have to be strategic, and as chaplains think about how to reach and touch people's hearts and hear, and also to be able to share what we're doing. We advocate for our work all the time. Like, why are we essential to the team? And I think this is a big part of it. We're essential to humanity in this role.
Thank you, Alyssa. So I can't believe our time is already running out. I feel like we can continue this conversation, and we will. There's a lot of people asking questions about, like, how can we create interfaith spaces within our local community, and also in the larger community. You all have been brought together because you did have, connections prior to the October 7th attack. But yeah, any suggestions for people? How can you begin to create these interfaith spaces?
I think it just depends on where you're at. We're spread out from coast to coast, and there's different resources all the way in between. But it's, if you're a clergy, is there a clergy group, an interfaith clergy group that you can become part of? I know that they're very active throughout the country. Is there an interreligious group within your city or state that you could connect with? I do think it's being proactive and looking outward at what might be available, or at a local university. And some of you admittedly might not have that resource. And so it is something intentionally we hope to maybe provide with the task force. Is there a group that could come together? I don't know. But there has to be intentionality about stepping out and looking and finding. And it's how you grow, and coming into those spaces with great humility. So,
Yes. Thank you, Erica.
So
go ahead, Amy.
I seem to have the same idea that I'm just saying in different ways, so you'll just forgive me for this. I think what's really important is to start with the relationships, and that you've seen it here with us and some of our work as a task force. So I think the multiple situations are so distressing that it often feels, I'm going to speak for myself, but I think for others as well, kind of like this kind of desperate self of like powerlessness, and wanting to, like, what I most want, what I think all of us want, is to be able to have the violence stop and peace. But it's too hard to start with the idea of like an action plan. I think sometimes we want to like run to the end, to the solution that we want to get to, but we can't get to that unless we actually start with relationships, or at least that's one strategy. So I would say for community building, the relationship is at the core of that. And then through getting to know one another, through witnessing one another's stories and experiencing, ideally we come to places of consensus where we can come together. So that's just my piece of advice, is to know that it's meaningful to spend time on the relationship building.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been a very insightful and enriching conversation. I'm sorry we did not get to all the questions, but again, I hope that this will just be a continuous dialogue. And I want to thank each of the panelists for your time, for the work that you're doing. Is there a way, Alyssa, I know you already shared at the beginning of the session kind of some of the strategies that you all would like to put in place, but is there a way that people can contact you to kind of, if they're not in your organizations, just to kind of stay up to date with what you all have decided to do, or suggestions? Can you just share a little bit about that before we jump off?
Yeah, I put my information in the chat. I'm happy we can put it in again. But I do think, I was going to say this is in many ways still the beginning of a conversation, and that, there will be resources and more tools coming out from your strategic partner organizations. If you're not a part of one of our organizations, we are very happy to share that with you as well. So again, we can share my information. Erica, I think at one point you had like a strategy for how we were going to get feedback from people. So I want to turn to you.
Yeah, we did at our last meeting. Again, we are putting out information within all of our respective newsletters for each organization. And we're going to, every time we put communication out, we make sure it's consistent with each other. And so after the last time we sent information out, we actually did receive some questions from our members. And so we want to continue that. How we get it out to the larger community, I would invite you to look at one of our various websites. And because we hope to house information on our websites as well with the work that we're doing. So we will do our best to communicate and be as transparent as we can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We appreciate all the work that you all are doing. So, a community of chaplains and spiritual care providers, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your very busy day to join us. And I would like to say, if you want to see more of these type of programs being, offered, please subscribe to icjs.org. There's a way in which you can sign up for our email list, and there's also a way in which you can share your feedback. There's going to be a survey after this panel discussion, and we would love to hear your feedback to say, we want more of this, or can we have this conversation in this type of format? But please subscribe to icjs.org. Please look out at the different websites for these different organizations so you can stay up to date on what they are doing. We have a lot of wonderful programming at ICJS. I did see in the chat there were some people that asked about, are there ways in which we can address everyday anti-Muslim bias and anti-Semitism? We actually have resources at the ICJS to do just that. And so I definitely encourage you all to look at our website to find additional information and resources. And so I would like to share with you some upcoming events that ICJS is offering. If you are in the greater Baltimore area in Maryland, on February 22nd, 7 to 9 p.m. at the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies, we are actually having a viewing of the documentary 3 Chaplains. And it goes inside the armed forces to reveal how 3 Muslim chaplains aim to make change in one of America's most powerful institutions, the U.S. military. And so some of you may be aware of this documentary already, but if you are in Baltimore, please, we would love for you to join us on February 22nd. And I believe the link for that event is in the chat. And then also, ICJS will be hosting a faculty seminar for scholars and spiritual practitioners this summer, where we're actually going to be exploring interreligious perspectives on death and dying. And so if that is something that you are interested in taking a deep dive into, we are accepting applications until March. And so we'll put that link in the chat box as well. But these are 2 upcoming events specifically for chaplains, and we'll have some other programming offered by chaplains as well. And just to let you know, ICJS is a non-sectarian and independent, unaffiliated with any academic or religious organization. And so we are supported by all of people like you. So if you would be interested in supporting ICJS so that we can continue to offer programs like this with no cost, again, we ask you to visit our website and you can feel free to donate there. But we are just grateful to have the opportunity to create dialogue spaces like this. And so we hope that you will join us for our upcoming events. And again, please fill out the survey after the panel discussion so that we can hear your feedback and make sure that our programming is meeting your needs. So thank you again. And again, thank you, panelists. You have been amazing. I appreciate you all and look forward to further conversation. So you all have a wonderful day.